Welcome to the hit podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. We want to keep to our commitment of keeping our conversations bite-sized, digestible from a size length. We don't want to go too long. And darn it, we ran a little bit long. So this is the continuation. If you missed any of the conversation, go back, catch the former parts. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, we're going to pick right up where we left off last week. And how long have you been a professional coach, just for context?
17 years now.
Yeah, right. So it's something that you're saying has evolved sort of over time, and there's been a fair amount of time to it. Kind of speaking of those years and those times, I appreciate the dialogue we're on with respect to messaging and how we can effectively drive a team. I want to get a little bit back to culture and maybe even kind of you guys literally have the locker room, but in business where we got kind of the hallways, we've got sort of the atmosphere. Talk to me about kind of places that have you building it or doing it right, or kind of bringing your team together. And even in a world where you guys maybe, for whatever reason, ownership or money things, you might have to lose some guys that you liked or everyone liked and bring in new guys, and kind of there's a storming, norming, and forming of teams, right? So just kind of play with those ideas for me.
Yeah, I think that human connection is really important. I think the facilities that you have can really set you up to be successful from that standpoint, because
the literal facilities, the quality of the actual literal,
like your practice facility. Yeah. The most powerful conversations that I have with a player are sitting down having a coffee. We go into we travel for 12 days coming up on the weekend to carry on to play some exhibition games, and those moments of sitting around the hotel, you're having a coffee and you're just chatting, can be some of the most powerful, because you actually get to know people and understand how they perceive things and what they're looking at. And then obviously the small little things that go along with whether it's a team dinner out or a team bonding exercise, whether that's in practice where you're making them work together, and maybe put a group of guys together that don't necessarily like each other, or they don't speak the same language, or they don't necessarily have that sort
of literally speak the same language.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously because we have obviously guys that come from all over the world, and potentially that now they've got to find a way to work together, and those can be some of the most, because the perception might be like, oh, that there's this and this, but then actually when they you make them work together, you end up coming away with a different opinion or a different view of knowing where they're coming from. I mean, we used to do it a lot. Have you seen
that work, like literally change, where it's like, hey, these two players felt a certain way about each other, and frankly, therefore only played to a certain level together, and we did bonding stuff, and then they felt better about each other and they played better together?
I don't know about necessarily like player to player, but for me, I've definitely seen it in a couple of ways. So with the national team, when I was working with US Soccer, we'd do team dinners out, and we'd always do sort of exercises at dinner. So staff would sit with players, and you're sitting with some 18, 19-year-olds. So you're getting a better understanding of like their upbringing, where they're coming from, which was, for me, was really interesting, really powerful. And we always used to go back and sort of talk about the questions that we'd have, because we, trying to find out more about them as people, like the dialogue and the understanding that you'd have to be able to share with the rest of the coaching staff, then just helps you in terms of, because ultimately you shouldn't, well, in my mind, you shouldn't manage people all the same way. I'm more
than you should parent kids the same way, right?
Yeah,
you have more than one kid, so do I.
Yeah, like I'm going to coach you differently. I'm going to coach the next person, just because of now, because I have a good understanding of who you are as a person. So really just get the help with, obviously, everybody again being on the same page, and the collective of everyone wanting to move the business, the team forward, for the good of everyone.
Right. And that's, maybe I glossed over that too quickly, but to unpack what I meant by it and see if we're on the same page, the reason I don't, talk to every employee the same or parent kids the same is because I think if we really want the message to resonate, then there's a portion of the message delivery that's on the deliverer. You can't put it all on the listener. if you don't tune into the frequency that they best listen at, a certain amount of your message will be lost. And therefore you need to attune the way that you deliver that message to each individual person so that it's catered into the format in which they ingest it most effectively.
100%. I mean, there's a ton of research out there on that, isn't there? That is, super applicable, and it goes back to, again, just your language that you use and your choice of delivery, maybe how you want to message something to a certain person. Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about trying to be successful and get the most out of someone, or maybe squeeze 1 or 2% more out of them, which can be a big difference sometimes. Or maybe help someone sort of grow in an area that they're maybe not as strong at, that you feel that they have potential, but they don't know that. Yeah, it's super powerful.
So you're talking a little bit about your relationship with the players, which, I don't mean to turn this into an org chart, but if you could sort of envision, you're almost kind of going down in that way where you're the coach and they're the players, but you, for context for the audience, are often, the assistant coach and not the head coach. And therefore you also have someone above you in the org chart of this kind of analogy. How do you give kind of thoughts on the best ways that you've navigated? And again, you're talking about a guy that took the U.S. national team to the World Cup, right? Won an MLS Cup. So obviously have found success in not only managing down in this analogy, but also presumably managing up at times.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously your relationship with the rest of the staff and is important, and it's, just what we've talked about, how you maybe talk to certain people maybe is different, and the questions and obviously I think for more than me with anything with sport in my world is just the timing of when you go and speak to the head coach, because you're always wary of, obviously they carry the weight of everything. So what you may want to ask, or the feedback that you're looking for on something, like, it's always for me about timing with that standpoint, because they have to obviously think about not just 1 or 2 things. They're covering everything on and off the field. So, their head is constantly, spinning, and they're always getting pulled left and right. So, if you're asking mundane questions about something that happened in the game, might not be a good thing to do when they've just come out of a meeting with the sporting director.
Yeah. What's interesting is I asked you for advice on how you deal with your higher ups. And before you talked about timing, which is a great note, you talked about how you interact with the rest of the staff. And I don't know if you did that inadvertently or you meant to, but I'm fascinated by that point, because what I took out of that was, hey, listen, before I even talk about how I literally interact myself with my superiors, I also want them to see how I interact with the rest of the people around me, because that's also going to be a reflection on my relationship with superiors, presumably.
Yeah, totally. And ultimately, I mean, in my world, it's hired to be fired, and to be shown that you actually can work within a coaching staff, especially when the moments get tough. And obviously, I always feel like there's a lot more tough moments in sport than there are good ones at times. So, making sure that you're doing things in the right way, regardless of whether they're good or bad. And again, it's like the old cliche of, don't get too high, don't get too low when things are good and bad. And it's about being consistent with your own attitude and your own behavior and approach to work, the people that you have to interact with, sort of, on a daily basis.
So 17-year career, so not pinpointing, any specific instance or player or whatever, but just giving you the free rein to answer this question ambiguously enough to where you can maybe answer it honestly enough. Talk to me about, so when you're leading a team, I wonder if there's been times where there's a player that's a great player, but that's kind of a problem, right? And so you're like, gosh, how do I deal with an employee that's, maybe a high performer, a great sales guy, really bringing a lot to this team? Can you talk to me about maybe some times, just generally speaking, where you guys have found success in navigating a high performance person that's a poor locker room moment,
Yeah, winning. Simple as that. It covers it all up. Yeah, I think ultimately it's about, just go back to some of the things, like the biggest thing you have to do is you have to work with that individual, and ultimately there may be some give and take at times, but you have to be sort of aware. And it's, more so for me, it would be the head coach that's got to be aware of it, and their conversations and those private conversations that they're having. I mean, I'm fortunate. I've never really had a sort of problem player. I think for me in my position ultimately would be just reporting to obviously the people above me about what is going on, and
Yeah,
ultimately comes down to sort of in a business term, sort of creating report for HR in terms of
right.
disciplinary, and ultimately for us it's about does the player stay or go, and
Mm.
that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Well,
Um,
stay or go is also an interesting thread to go on because more specifically, most of your high profile coaching roles, you've been the goalkeeper coach, and that's not got a lot of it's got more applicants than it's got seats on the bus type of a thing. You've presumably been in situations where you've had to deliver tough news to someone that they're maybe not going to be around or not going to make this team or not going to be here next season or whatever that is. Maybe talk to me about hard conversations.
yeah, I think for me, I think the hard conversations, I think with certain with certain players that maybe don't play, like you said, as a goalkeeper, only one gets to play predominantly. I think more of those conversations, they can be sort of had, and as long as you're honest, I've always found that, and I've had, you have tough moments with players, and they don't like what you're saying to them at that moment because they obviously don't feel the same. However, ultimately, I have always felt in the end that they always come back and go, "Yeah, I didn't like what you were saying, but you were right." So it's that it's the honesty is that biggest piece.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more that you lie or try and sort of sugarcoat it just to try and avoid it, ultimately ends up blowing up.
Is that hard to do sometimes?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know.
No,
I'm
I don't,
free.
because I mean, ultimately, because for me, the biggest thing is like what's going to happen is there's going to end up become friction. So it becomes, do you want to be honest and have the difficult conversation to begin with, where the player walks away and doesn't agree, and ultimately has to come around to it and does, or you get to a point where you've led them along and it blows up,
Yeah.
and that can cause that, and if because here's the problem I see with that is that if you're in a leadership role and you're bringing someone along and then all of a sudden you basically drop them out of
Mm.
nowhere, there's a knock-on effect to the rest of the group because you're a separate person to them. So like for us as me as a goalkeeping coach, I predominantly work with 4 players. So if I lead one of them along, the other 3 are going to take exception to that because they're going to be really close. So
Mm.
ultimately, now I'm asking the other 3, yeah, you've got to go out and play and do your best for us. And then ultimately, if things aren't going well, it's ultimately I feel can cost you.
Mm. Mm. So maybe getting out of here today, I'm curious, what's like a cool moment? Give me like a career highlight, a story, a moment, a phone call, a game, a opportunity. What's cool?
Oh, I mean, obviously, I think winning trophies and those. Though I'm fortunate. I've won obviously trophies in Atlanta, 2 trophies, won 2 trophies with the national team, and I think those waning moments where you're looking at it going, yes, we've done this. Like
Yeah.
that's truly special. But then obviously the one that sticks out is the opportunity to represent the US at a World Cup against my country of birth.
Yeah.
Being England was truly special. Being fortunate enough to have your family there, and ultimately being a game that we did well and we showed well on ourselves and we should have won. So I've been
Drew,
very
to be fair,
fortunate.
right?
Pardon?
Drew, to be fair, didn't lose.
Yeah, it was a tie, but I still think we should have won the game.
Yeah, yeah, but for the listener, you did lose.
But ultimately the relationships of the people you meet with. I mean, basically, it's the old cliche where you're like a family
Yeah.
uh, in sport because you literally spend so much time together. When you think about the travel, the bus rides, the hotels, the meeting rooms, on the practice field, the wins, the highs of those, and the losses and the lows, and um, that's the truly special thing is like the people that you get to interact with, because obviously I'm fortunate that these people come from all over the world.
That's interesting too, because when you talk about all the moments you guys spend together, you remind us, the casual fan, that it's not just me sitting on the sidelines in front of the fans. There's a lot that goes into my job. Like you said, the meetings, the this, the that. And I bet, just like any job, there's probably parts of it you don't like, right? You have to do things you don't like. And I wonder if you can maybe close this out with some thoughts that, hey, listen, at the highest levels, at the professional levels, when there's things you don't like doing, you got to do them, and here's why, or here's how, or here's a quick story, or here's how I get through them.
Yeah, for sure. I think, ultimately it's like, doing, just going through hours and hours of tape and, trying to get things in the right things to present to the team. You go through hours and hours to do 3 minutes worth of video, and you're hoping that can help you give a marginal gain to help you be successful against an opponent. There's all those little things, sitting in hotels, being delayed on a plane, getting stuck somewhere, being away from your family. It's you miss big events as weddings and stuff. You unfortunately you have to miss them. So yeah, there's a huge sacrifice, not just from yourself as a coach or a player, but also for your families as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of your beautiful family, give them my love, and thank you so much for joining us here today, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. And I hope everyone stays safe out there on the West Coast.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate that as well. That's all the time we have for you here today on the H.I.T podcast. Thank you to our sponsors, True Hue. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.